Hello, everyone. Dr. Allen here. Hope you're having a great week, had a great weekend. Um, I said I'd get this video out before our class this Tuesday, and I'm going to try to honor that promise or commitment or statement. A few things. I'm recording this obviously on Zoom, and I'm going to share it with you. I'm going to do this in one take, so forgive me if I make any mistakes or anything like that, or start coughing uncontrollably for some reason. I just wanted to get you something related to the content and kind of go over what's expected since we're not meeting live this week. Um, what we were going to don't forget, this week we're talking about world history in the classroom. Next week we're going to talk a little bit about civics. We're going to kind of do that a little off the cuff though, because we're going to do it at the Bird Center. And don't forget, you'll be able to get some food and everything else. But with that being said, we're going to talk about world history in the classroom. I'm going to talk about the content that I wanted to cover first. I'll try to keep it as short as possible, and then I'll go over the assignments, and we'll go from there. I'm just going to stop babbling and tell you world history in the classroom, and just some things to think about when you're teaching world history. Forgive me, this was the Nearpod that I was going to use, but obviously you're not going to complete that. But I still want to kind of point out a few things. One, I've mentioned Zeven. That was the old textbook that we used to use for this class. Don't forget, we talked about 2 weeks ago about didactic, reflective, and effective goals or teaching approaches. Didactic is that kind of stand and deliver. You're just trying to get base level knowledge back. I always think about it as the facts level, where it's very teacher centered, where you're going to stand, you're going to talk, you're going to deliver, and students are going to try to memorize and take information back. That's a broad sense, but that's kind of what you want to remember from it. Reflective is when you start to ask those questions. I think it's when you're starting to get more into that inquiry-based things where you want students to start, you're going to pose that big question and you want students to start to ask the questions about the content that you're posing or presenting. And effective is really the students starting to take the content by the horn, so to speak, starting to think critically, maybe making connections. Like we've mentioned, since it's world history, the Crusades, we had talked about backwards approaches, maybe, what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now. You'll go back maybe World War II, maybe during the age of colonialism, and then so on and so on until you get back to the Middle Ages and the Crusaders and Outremer and places and things like that. So, students starting to fill in the gaps and such. That's your effective. So didactic facts, I think reflective, inquiry, question-based, effective, critical thinking, that's very broad, but I think it's a good way to kind of think about it, especially when we're just doing a video. And I'm going to point something out. We're going to talk, you might see knowledge, skill, and attitudinal objectives. We're going to talk about that with lesson planning in 2 weeks. So don't worry too much about that, but I think they're self-explanatory. They kind of link right up to that. But knowledge is like your facts, skills will be like reading a map, and attitudinal about opinions or ideas or feelings about a social studies topic. There are three types of ways to organize your content in world history, or at least your approaches. There's theme-based, which might be something like you might have a topic and that's how you're going to teach it. Revolutions would be a good one if you're teaching world history. World history, you might, instead of like doing it in chronological order, you might say, this week, this unit is on revolutions. So you might do the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the Russian Revolution. They're all one. I would throw American Revolution in there, but I think because of your US history courses, that would probably be its own thing. The Greek Revolution, the revolutions of 1848, all those type of things. The Taipei, things, you get the point. Technology can be very broad. It could be as far as like the wheel all the way up to social media, things like that. That's one way you can organize world history. Another one is chronologically, which I think is what most people do. You just kind of go, but I say that, but if you think about it, a lot of times we start with like the river societies, Mesopotamia, China, India, Egypt. But when we do that, I think we still teach those kind of like in a geography based type thing. So students don't always know, they know it's kind of around the same time, but how they work. But still, as you can see, we kind of teach it in terms of ancient, medieval, colonial, modern, so to speak. And then, of course, there's place. You can teach world history based on places. I'm going to look at Africa. I'm going to look at America. I've done all of these and tried all of them. I think obviously this is the most common is the chronological. I think this is how textbooks are organized. I think it's how teachers organize. And it's probably the one I've used the most. I have used this, especially in my middle grades. I actually really like this. You just got to make sure students understand that there's other things going on. You know, you can kind of lose place or track of time, so to speak, like if you're talking about what's going on in the Americas. And when I mean Americas, I'm talking like maybe Canada or South America, what's going on there at the same time as what's going on in Europe or Asia. I've started before I came here at Shepherd. I really started to do a lot more thematic type lessons, which I think students really enjoyed. It's a lot of work. I think for most beginning teachers, this is the one that you go to. It's kind of the default, but there's different ways to do it. I must have had a question here. And just kind of think about which one you would take. I guess the thematic, chronological, or geographical. And other things you got to think about too as you're teaching, there's a Western history approach, which is basically Europe, 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 Europe. As a former student here at Shepherd, that was what I got in the 101, 102, and 103 classes were basically called Western Civ. We've kind of moved away from that, not just at Shepherd, but just in social studies and history abroad. But everything still kind of seems to map back to that when we do instruction and standards and things like that. It's usually organized in a chronological type way. It's kind of the idea that outside areas outside of the West don't really have much influence in terms of this approach. In the Americas are usually seen as an extension of European history. I think this is still, for better or worse, sometimes the default approach. I will be the first person to admit, I really try to get better with incorporating world history. This is what I had when I was a history major. So it's kind of what I went with. So sorry, my watch was ringing. All right. And let's go to the next one. My watch was ringing. It's a weird one, but yeah, it was throwing me off. I think one thing, if you are in a very Western history approach or lesson, make sure you do try to incorporate some non-Western content, especially from other people's point of view. It's on my mind, so I'll just talk about the Crusades. Crusades would be a good example where, we always look at things from the Crusaders' point of view. Maybe you can do something. There's a lot of artwork you can do, like with Saladin, and show how he is portrayed in the Middle East versus how he was shown in artwork in Europe. So, and I might have that on here. I can't remember. There's also the regional one. I mentioned this. This is where you're kind of more spatial, but as you can see, these are kind of some of the areas. Topography, you might do it along there. It allows for more comparisons of regions, cities, political systems, and things like that. When I taught, excuse me here. I'm going to pause this real quick. I got a message that kind of just threw me off. Look, I told you it was going to be like high-end stuff here. I was going to not stop though. Hey, I'm back. Sorry, my dentist kept calling me, but I already scheduled an appointment. So you don't care about that. Let me get back to world history. It was driving me nuts. They kept calling and leaving things on my phone. I keep holding my watch up. Few other things, approaches to this. When I taught middle school, it was something that I did catch myself doing, and I kind of liked it. We would kind of look at things in chunks. So, for example, we would look at East Asia, then we would look at Southeast. And I will be the first to admit sometimes we would actually not focus on some areas as much as others because it's the students in West Virginia was their first real introduction to world history. So it kind of let me control and filter what I was kind of getting into and what I thought students might be interested in. But it does give you a little more, I don't want to say flexibility, but you can definitely frame it a little, in terms of spatial and isolational type stuff. So if any of that makes sense. So world history is one. I'm sorry, Western approach is one. Spatial or regional. And one thing I like to ask, and maybe I'll do it when we come back, but what are two countries from each area that you think have to be taught? And these are just, if you think about it, maybe, just give it a whirl, give it a little bit. I might ask you when we come back. It might be our bell ringer. But what are the two countries and topics that you think have to be taught from each? South America, North America, Africa. And when I say North America, Canada, Mexico below, not the United States. Um, Africa, Asia, Middle East, Oceania, or Europe, and or Europe. There's also the international relations approach. This is one where it's more about the political relationships and connections among people, groups, agencies, nations. So you might look at something like NATO, the UN, kind of go about that. It's more politically based. It's a little more modern based, which might be a good thing. Um, as you can see, I talked about it often starts in the present and works back. I mentioned the Crusades as one that you could do. You could also get into things like even, Afghanistan or what is going on in Russia and Ukraine and start going backwards. I think it does give students a little more of a connection to the modern, which is a good thing. And also, when you do your blogs this week, one of the resources is Brown University's Choices. Check those out. They're actually kind of interesting. Model UN is another one. I don't know if I have those up on this week. I'll post those up if you want to look at the guides. But it kind of makes the current events. It gives that background and why things are the way they are, so to speak. And that's the international relations approach. Um, I like looking at these questions just to see if I can throw a few out at you. How far back can you go? That's a good one. I'm think when we come back, I might throw some of these out at you just to see. Um, Approaches to a planning, the global history approach. I think it's very much like the international in some regards, but it's more world history than it is European and US history, so to speak. So if you're looking at a case study of British imperialism in India, maybe it's a little more from India's point of view than it is from the British point of view, which I think we always kind of default to. And this next one we're going to look at is called the cross-cultural approach. It actually is the same kind of way. You're looking at things not just from a Western lens. The World History Project, which I have a link to on the Brightspace page, gets into this a little more. It's more world history than Western Civ. Kind of on a theme with that a little bit, aren't I? And there's the other one. And as you can see, the cross-cultural, you can kind of think about cross-cultural in three historical lenses: the social lens, the political lens, and the economic lens. And again, it's kind of looking at things on a more modern scale and how history has shaped our modern world. Again, more global, so to speak. Think about which one you would do. I will be the first to admit, again, your standards sometimes direct you to which one you're going to do. And I would be shocked if most of you didn't start with the chronological a little bit more. And I do think our standards lead themselves a little bit more to the Western approach than anything. So, and I'm going to sneeze. So I'm going to pause this on you so you don't have to hear that. And we're back after I sneezed. And then a few other things that you can consider. We've talked about these, so I'm kind of glad, and I did kind of sneak these in, but always have your students think like a historian. Um, that could be the HIPPO approach, the sources approach, like your book, which I know everyone's reading, looking through things through different lenses. We're going to talk a little more about that with when we get down the line, and like how you can look at things from a religion lens or a geographic lens. Check it out. And then, of course, here's some things you can do. But when it all is said and done, and this is actually what West Virginia is trying to get you to do in all social studies, state standards are trying to get you to have your students do. I'm going to reset that. What you want your students to do and what you really should be doing with your lessons is thinking like a historian, asking these questions: the cause and effect, what the changes, the turning points, the using of the past, looking at things through other people's eyes. You can do that through, the HIPPO approach, sources, grapes. None of these are the end all be all, but they're tools. So, and I'll have this up for you if you want to check it out. The Nearpod. What's a primary source you can use in a lesson? Think about it. I'm always falling back to artwork. That's School of Athens, Raphael. It's kind of showing the humanism in full effect, and the meeting of Greek and Roman influence on the Renaissance, and of course how all these famous artists and such are kind of portrayed as Greeks, so to speak. So good painting to actually incorporate. And also always think about your methodology. Think about your assessments. We have not talked too much about assessments. And one thing about your assessments is when we get into it, we're going to talk a little more about it with the unit plans. That was actually one thing we were going to do tonight, but I would like to do that as a more of a live lesson to kind of think about things you can do. But I will go ahead. I have some folders up on some assessment ideas. I'll put those under this week if you want to check them out. There's nothing you have to do with them. I can move them to the next week too. So another thing, and you'll see the link to it, when you're teaching geography, always keep these in mind. There's a lot of different ones. National Geographic has a really broad set of standards for teaching social or geography. I get it, and they're really good. Sometimes I think it's the old KISS philosophy, though, keep it simple, stupid. And I think the 5 themes of geography really do that. So when you're teaching geography or teaching places or teaching world history, never forget, you want to keep it on the idea of location, place, human environmental interaction, movement, and region. Location is literally where it is. There's relative and absolute location. Relative is sort of where it is. Like I live close to Martinsburg. My absolute location would be my latitude and longitude, so to speak. Place, it's just like it answers the question like it is. What's it like, around here? We're mountainous. We got a small urban type setting because of Martinsburg and DC kind of moving out this way. Human environmental interaction, that's, coal mining, creation of roads, going through mountains with tunnels. Movement, like is this an area where people are moving to, moving out? The Great Migration in a historical sense would be a nice example for movement. And region, it's the unifying characteristics of an area. So I think the 5 themes of geography are always a good way to teach geography if you're trying to do it. You can do this with every place that you're talking about. It's not just about maps. And there's the 5 themes in a little blurry sense. And here's some things you can think about: the physical, environmental, and human geography. And that's the last that slide. So that's just kind of the lecture. It's a little quicker than what we would have done in class, but I wanted to get it out there. I would have felt guilty if I didn't do something, even if it means me sneezing and trying not to have my nose run or anything like that. Sorry, a little bit of allergies. This week, you will see world history materials. There's a ton up here. I can't help it, but I'm just going to show you some examples. We had talked about some assessments. If you ever want to look at facts, this is World History Fact Book. You can do any of these for your blog, by the way, but this actually talks about, like, you can get data on any country on this. It's awesome. It's just, check it out. You can kind of fish around, explore countries. You can explore all countries and just look up Afghanistan since it's first. Photos, there's data, travel facts, country facts sheet, and it just starts getting into everything. That's a good resource site for your students. Rick Steves Europe, I like the show. It's on PBS. They have great clips. He has something called Rick Steves in the Classroom, or Rick Steves Classroom Europe, where he has little 2, 3-minute, 5-minute clips about different locations. Some of it is history, and you can see you can thin it, like narrow the search. I was going to say thin it out a little bit. There's also some examples like with World History Organization. This is basically what I just talked about. Let's see if it loads up. It's a little slow. I'll make sure it is. It's the lecture notes that I have. And I'll try to go back. Also, here's some examples on some farce books that I did. Like, I'm on a little bit of a crusade kick, but Urban II, the Pope at the time, I did a little Facebook thing example, his networks, papacy, Vespers, the Notre Dame Tailgate Club. You can get into that, political views. I have my students complete these on historical figures sometimes and all. You can get tons of word templates now. You can have different, they can do a little comment sheet. And I would let them do 1 or 2 funny things, like Urban Meyer, the former coach at Ohio State. He was an Urban. So, but by and large, I tried to keep them kind of straightforward. Famous movies. I think I had Indiana Jones and the Last Crusades on here. Yeah. So Passion of the Christ. There's also another one here, hero versus villain. This is something for National Council of Social Studies, but you can do a hero versus villain, different points of view with this one on Alexander the Great. Literature chart, that's Animal Farm. Can't go wrong combining any type of readings in your language arts classes with social studies. Animal Farm is the perfect example. If you've not read Animal Farm, read it. World War One posters. Here's a Funko Pop exercise where you can create them. There's 5 themes of geography. There was even a Netflix one that I had. It's a little slow, but you can actually have students make a Netflix show. Check these out. There's all types of stuff. There's choices that I mentioned in the lecture, and there's the DBQ. Choices is actually going, I think the funding's there, but it's still there. So you can still check it out. I don't know what's available. You'll probably be able to find one online before long. Resources, you're going to complete the blog. Here's some more of the resources if you need them DBQs. You can do it on any of this stuff, though. I don't care for resources for the blog. The discussion post, I thought I had a discussion. I do, and I have not posted it yet. Let's just go on in there. Should be discussion 3, I believe. And it is right here. Oh, yep, it's on Anchor Charts. I might change that a little bit to the world history one just to kind of make sure that you're checking things out. Like what are the 2 countries? So this will be updated for. We did an Anchor Chart in class, so I'm not too overly concerned about that. So I'll have that updated. I want to see what you would say are the 2 things in each country that need to be taught and such. So just because we're not going to be there, that way I don't have to do it as a bell ringer. Last but not least, don't forget, I'll send out a reminder. You do have a Padlet that is going to be due. And let me go right there. I have this example, but the Padlet was the one where you had to do an inquiry-based exercise where you're just going to pick, I think I said 4 or 5. I'll double check the assignment real quick before I sign off. But you're going to have a big question. Has an assassination ever changed history? You don't have to do that one, just a big question. And then you're going to pick a primary source or an image and have a question that would be related to it. So let's look. I think I had 4. Create a Padlet with the following. Central focus, that's the big one. Has an assassination ever changed history? What's your theme? There's the themes right there. Your social studies. We did those. Remember, we put the images up on the wall and you all did them in groups. I gave you the handout, I believe, too. 4, you only need to do 4 sources that would work. So, you know, if you have, like I did, has an assassination ever changed history? I need to have a sub question for a topic and an image to load up there. I did mention you can do this on a Word document if it's too hard to figure out the Padlet. I don't want you to be up at night. And then you need to make sure that you are connected to a West Virginia state standard. You all have those because they give you a hard copy, and you just submit this on Brightspace. That is the week. So what you need to do, blog 4, discussion 3, Padlet 3. And that should do it. I should have this up if you're watching it, but I did send out a thing. I should have it up by Tuesday sometime so you can kind of go right at it. So with all that being said, thank you very much. Thanks for bearing with me with one take. I know I stopped and sneezed and had, I think, my dentist calling me. So weird, but I said I wouldn't stop. I'm not going to stop. So, all right, that's it. Hope everyone has a great week. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. And let me go ahead and, sorry, I'm a little slow here. There we go. Hope everyone has a great week. Stop by my office, though. I will be in and out. Like I say, Tuesday, I will even actually be here till about 4 o'clock on Tuesday. But I'm rolling right out. So if you do need to have a question, catch me before noon because I'm in a training from 12 to 4, I believe. So, all right. Hope everyone has a great week, and I'll talk to you later.